My family always favored my cousin, then demanded I give her my biggest business contract. When I refused, Dad threatened, "You'll lose everything." Minutes later, police arrived. My name is Kyle, and for most of my life I've been the family doormat. I was the kid who got stuck babysitting my cousins, while everyone else enjoyed themselves. I was the one who got told to be grateful when I worked summers at my uncle's store for free. I was the one who was expected to be understanding when my parents dipped into my savings just until things get better. If you've grown up in a family where certain people are treated like royalty and others like background characters, you'll get what I mean. In my family, the queen has always been my cousin, Amelia. Amelia and I are the same age, 26, but our lives couldn't look more different. She was the golden grandchild. Sorry, the perfect angel in my grandparents' eyes. She got expensive summer camps, trips abroad, tuition fully covered at an overpriced private university, and the down payment on her first condo handed to her like a gift basket. Me, I was told college wasn't a guarantee. And when I worked extra shifts just to cover my rent, my parents would say, "Well, Amelia struggles too. You know, she's got it hard." She drove a brand new SUV at 19 while I was biking to my job at the grocery store. Over the years, I kept my mouth shut. I tried to be the bigger person, but inside, I was keeping score, not because I wanted their money, but because the hypocrisy burned. Every lecture about me not being ambitious enough. While Amelia was praised for the simplest things, it added up. Fast forward to 2 years ago, I started my own business. It was small at first, an online resale shop where I bought closeout inventory and flipped it. My parents rolled their eyes. Amelia openly mocked it, and at family dinners, I'd hear lines like, "Kyle's little hobby won't last." But the hobby grew, quietly, carefully. I expanded. I learned the ropes of supply chains, negotiated with distributors, and built a customer base. By last year, I had warehouses in 2 states and enough contracts to keep me comfortable for life. Here's the thing, I didn't tell my family, not out of shame, but out of strategy. I knew how they operated. The second they smelled money, they'd come knocking with hands out. And of course, I was right. It started a few months back when Amelia called me out of nowhere. Her voice was syrupy sweet, which immediately set off alarms. She never called unless she needed something. "Kyle, hey, it's been forever. Listen, I heard you've been doing really well. I was thinking maybe we could collaborate. I've been planning to launch my own boutique, and you have all that business experience. We'd make such a great team." Translation: do all the work for me. Hand over your contacts and let me slap my name on it. I play dumb. Oh, that's interesting. What kind of boutique? She rambled about some vague vision of high-end clothing. Luxury loungewear, she called it, though she had no designs, no suppliers, not even a website. Basically, she wanted me to build it for her and bankroll the rest. I told her I'd think about it, which in my language meant never. Weeks passed and I figured she'd moved on. But then came the moment that set everything in motion. I had been working on a huge contract with a supplier who was unloading a limited batch of premium stock, exactly the kind of deal that could expand my reach even further. I'd been negotiating quietly, keeping things under wraps. Then Amelia found out. I still don't know how. My guess is one of my parents mentioned something after fishing for details. Suddenly, she was blowing up my phone. "Kyle, you can't close that deal. That's the supplier I need for my boutique. You know, I've been planning this for months. If you go through with it, you'll ruin me." I stared at my screen in disbelief. She was acting like she owned something she hadn't even lifted a finger to secure. "Amelia," I said flatly, "I've been working on this for weeks. This isn't your deal." Her voice hardened. "You owe me, Kyle. After everything this family has done for you, the least you can do is help me succeed. Don't be selfish." There it was, the family card. The same guilt trip they'd used on me my entire life. But this time, I wasn't playing along. I closed the deal, signed the papers, shook the hands, and secured the contract that would make my business nearly untouchable in my niche. An hour later, my phone lit up with Dad's name. "You need to fix this," he said, without preamble. His tone was sharp, the way it used to be when I forgot chores as a kid. "Amelia says you undercut her. That supplier should have been hers." I sat there gripping the phone tighter. "Dad, she doesn't even have a business plan. That supplier didn't know her name. This was my deal. You'll lose everything if you don't help," he warned. "Don't be stubborn. Family comes first." That line again. Always family first. But somehow it never applied when I was the one needing help. By morning, I had 29 missed calls from family members. Mum, Dad, Amelia, even my Aunt Muriel. The messages were all the same. Demands, guilt trips, threats, and that's when I did something none of them saw coming. I froze every single shared family account I still had access to. The joint savings I was once forced to contribute to the emergency funds, where my name was still listed, locked down. If they were going to treat me like the enemy, I wasn't going to leave them with ammunition. When I checked my phone again, Amelia had left me a voice message that started with, "You don't know who you're messing with, Kyle. You think you're smart, but I'll make sure everyone sees what kind of person you really are." I spent the rest of that morning in a kind of stunned silence. My phone buzzed incessantly, a parade of notifications I couldn't bring myself to answer. 29 missed calls turned into 45 within an hour, then 60, and the texts kept coming. "Call me now. This isn't funny. You're destroying everything. Your grandmother will never forgive you." I let it all pile up. Let them stew in the anxiety they had so freely poured on me for years. After a while, I finally picked up on speaker while I brewed coffee. My parents were both on the line, Mum's voice tight and trembling with fury, Dad's clipped and controlled. Amelia was in the background practically shouting, though she tried to mask it with fake sobbing and manipulation. "Kyle," Dad began without greeting, "this is serious. You need to undo what you did. We can't have you undermining Amelia like this. She has plans. You've ruined months of preparation." "Plans!" I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. "You mean schemes? Amelia doesn't have a single business plan, a budget, or a website. She has a wish list, and you all are trying to make me complicit in it." Mom's voice cracked. "You don't understand. She's your cousin. She's family. We've always helped each other. I laughed bitterly. "You mean taking advantage of me while letting her walk over everything I've worked for? That's not help. That's exploitation." There was a pause on the other end, and I could feel the shift immediately. For the first time, I wasn't the one trembling under the weight of their expectations. They were. "Listen," Dad said finally. His tone I see now. "You'll regret this. You know how things work in this family. You don't just betray us and walk away." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had already frozen the accounts, emergency funds, joint investments, even the account where Grandma and Grandpa had their old savings. My fingers had worked quickly last night, logging in, verifying credentials, and hitting freeze on every transaction. They couldn't touch a single cent until they sorted themselves out, and that included Amelia's boutique fantasies. I could feel Amelia's presence through the speaker. Her voice was small at first, like a child realizing the rules had suddenly changed. "You can't do that," she whispered, almost afraid. "Oh, I already did," I said. "And if you think whining, crying, or threatening me is going to reverse it, you're in for a surprise. I'm done being the family punching bag." For a moment, silence fell. Not the polite, awkward silence of a paused conversation, but the thick, charged silence of people realizing they had lost control. Then the call started again. My Aunt Muriel called first, then Uncle Roger, then more distant relatives who somehow thought they had authority over my life. Every single one ended the same way. Me saying, "Not my problem," and hanging up. It was surreal. For the first time in my life, the tables were turned and I could feel it in the way my heart was racing. This wasn't just revenge. It was validation. The years of manipulation, of favoritism, of constant guilt trips had built up to this. Amelia wasn't done, though. Not by a long shot. That afternoon, she started sending emails, legal-sounding threats. "I will make sure you regret this. This is theft. You are legally obligated." I didn't respond. I couldn't. She didn't realize that I had already covered my basis. Every account I had access to was locked. Every transaction had verification steps that required my personal authorization. And she, along with the rest of my family, didn't have a clue what I had done behind the scenes. By evening, I was checking my sales reports. The business I had built from nothing was thriving in ways I hadn't even anticipated. Deals I had quietly nurtured were closing. Customers were leaving glowing reviews, and my warehouse was a controlled chaos of orders ready to ship. Meanwhile, my family was stuck scrambling, panicking over frozen accounts and block transactions. And then came the subtle messages, the ones meant to manipulate. Texts from Grandma saying, "Kyle, this isn't you. You're breaking our family," or from Mom, "Do this for Amelia. She's struggling. I know you can help." Every message was a reminder of how long I had tolerated being treated like a disposable tool. I read them, then deleted them. Not because I didn't care. I cared too much, actually. But because this time caring didn't mean bending over backwards to save people who had spent my entire life undermining me. Later that night, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, thinking about what would come next. I knew they weren't going to back down. Amelia wouldn't. My parents wouldn't. They were used to getting their way by bullying, guilt-tripping, or shaming anyone who stood in their path. And now I was the obstacle. I thought about the history, the family gatherings where my opinions were ignored, the times I was mocked for choosing a career path they considered unworthy. I thought about Amelia showing off her condo while I worried about rent. I thought about every lecture, every sigh, every thinly veiled insult masquerading as concern. And for the first time, I realized that none of that mattered anymore. I had power, real tangible power that they couldn't manipulate with words or family loyalty. It was late when Amelia's next move arrived. A direct message on the platform she knew I monitored. It wasn't an email, not a text. It was personal, calculated, and it was a step further than any threat before. "Kyle, you force my hand. You think this is about money. It's about control. I won't let you humiliate me like this. You may have one today, but I promise you tomorrow it will be my turn." I stared at the screen. A cold knot of satisfaction and unease twisted in my stomach. She had no idea what I was capable of, and yet I knew she would escalate. She always did. Every slight, real or imagined, turned into an all-out battle when she felt threatened. The problem was, this time, the battlefield wasn't just business. It was family, and in my experience, there was no bottom to how far they would sink when cornered. I set my phone aside and went to the window. The city was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I could feel the weight of what I had done and what I was about to face. I started keeping a notebook after that week. Tiny, unassuming, leather-bound, because my head was too loud, and I needed a place to pin the chaos down. Names, times, things people said, every voicemail, every text. I wrote down the dates I froze accounts, the exact contract numbers, the timestamps when Amelia had called begging and then threatening. It felt almost childish to catalog it like evidence, but I knew how stories get rewritten once they start moving through mouths and social feeds. If I wanted any chance of surviving this, I needed a ledger, not a memory. Amelia's reaction was slow at first, like a dog circling a wound. She tried the obvious charm, tears, guilt. When that didn't work, she moved to pressure. Calls to suppliers, subtle hints to mutual contacts, the kind of whispering campaign that lives in the gray spaces where people aren't sure what to believe. "Did you hear Kyle took that contract?" Someone would ask at a trade show. It's kind of messy. The rumor spread because it's always easier to believe betrayal than to ask uncomfortable questions, and because a lot of the people in our industry still preferred gossip to invoices. She tried the old family playbook. Get other people to do your dirty work. Amelia called my old high school friends, acquaintances, anyone who might have an audience. She got my Aunt Muriel to post a vague, dramatic message on social media about betrayal and what success can do to a family. Miel has a following that likes drama, and the comment section predictably blew up. My name trended for a few hours anyway, as people lectured about gratitude and duty and the sin of refusing your family. I watched it happen in real time and did the thing I'd learned to do when I needed space. I didn't answer. I let the noise wash past while I focused on the things that mattered. The contracts, the warehouses, the people who actually worked for me. I sent a short, carefully worded message to my core team. Keep shipments moving, do not engage with anyone from my family, and log anything suspicious. I also called Aaron, my lawyer from when I'd incorporated, and told him I needed everything moved into an entity that couldn't be touched without a lengthy legal process. He did not blink. He specialized in messy family business entanglements, which made him useful and, more importantly, blunt. "I'll set up a holding company," he said over the phone. "We file the necessary transfers, we change the signatories, and we make sure your personal assets are ring-fenced. If Amelia or your parents try anything legal, it's going to be expensive and slow for them. That may buy you breathing room." Breathing room felt like currency now. I signed what he sent at midnight. It was boring paperwork that smelled faintly of toner and administration, and the smallness of it calmed me more than it should have. It was clean, deliberate, and complicated enough that I could imagine it being a real obstacle for someone used to getting things with a call and a sob story. She responded to that by going more public. The smear campaigns evolved into something with teeth, false claims to suppliers that I was selling counterfeit goods, anonymous tips to a consumer watchdog about unlicensed distributors, and an email to one of my biggest clients questioning the origin of a recent shipment. Those were all designed to make the people who mattered, distributors, investors, repeat customers, second-guess me. I expected the first two. I did not expect the third. I got a call from Sarah, the buyer at a boutique chain we'd worked with for 3 seasons. She sounded strained. "Kyle," she said, "someone flagged an order. They're saying the catalog numbers don't match the barcodes. We're holding everything until we can verify." I could have panicked. Instead, I asked neutral questions. When the doubt comes for you, the worst thing you can do is let it crowd out your composure. I told Sarah exactly what I'd done to secure the inventory, the supplier checks, the certificates of authenticity, the photos, the chain of custody emails. I sent a video of the pallets being loaded at our secure dock with timestamps, and a face I trusted, the night shift manager, Louise, who'd been with me since the early days, narrating each crate. Sarah took the evidence. She ran it through her compliance team, and she released the order 2 days later. Not a victory worth celebrating, but a hold avoided. Amelia's approach shifted. Then if rumors couldn't plan a doubt, she would create logistical problems. She found a way to bribe a seasonal worker at one of our drop-off points, $120. and a promise of being given first pick of some exclusive items. The kid was sloppy. He swapped a pallet label and called it a mistake. One mix-up and a few angry customers could have been enough for the whole thing to wobble. When I saw the inventory report that night and noticed an irregularity, a dozen jackets labeled for a boutique were scanned at a clearance outlet. I felt the old, familiar adrenaline. Instead of reacting, I traced the chain. We have small redundancies in place because mistakes happen. 2 scanners register each shipment and the shipping software sends alerts for mismatches. That's how I caught it. I pulled the security footage for that dock and watched the kid walk in with his hoodie up, then leave 15 minutes later with a different crate. He didn't get far. Louise intercepted him in the loading bay, and when confronted, the kid cracked and told everything. I recorded his confession, him admitting Amelia had approached him at a party and offered the money. I forwarded the recording to my legal team and to the supplier. Then I sent a simple, calm message to my staff. Any tampering or fraud will be prosecuted to the fullest extent. My tone was neutral, but the message hit home. People who had been on the fence stepped closer. Loyalty is often a quiet thing, affirmed by action rather than words. That night, I also took a step I hadn't been proud of earlier. I began to talk, not to the family, but to the people who mattered in my industry. There's a weird economy of trust in business. If you control the narrative to the people whose livelihoods depend on you, you control a lot. I made 20 phone calls, not to explain my side as a plea for sympathy, but to supply facts. I sent contracts, timestamps, career logs. Transparency used wisely becomes defense. Amelia realized that the rumor mill wasn't going to have the effect she wanted anymore. So, she went for escalation. She filed something with the bank, the kind of complaint that asks for an audit, claiming irregular withdrawals and misappropriated funds. She hired a lawyer whose billing statement looked expensive and whose emails were threatening, and she arranged for a surprise inspection of our main warehouse, filed through a small consumer protection office in a neighboring jurisdiction. When I heard about the inspection, I went cold. Not because inspections are inherently dangerous, they're not, but because the timing mattered. If they hit our warehouse at the wrong moment with half the inventory inbound and the paperwork in transit, it becomes chaos. Chaos favors the loudest voice, and Amelia, with her family's patience for spectacle, was always loud. I called Aaron. If they show up with any kind of warrant, we lock the facility and get counsel on site. Do not let anyone speak without me here. He arranged an emergency retainer and told me to expect a visit. The morning they came, my phone was a lit map of alerts. Amelia had done something I didn't expect. She'd involved the local regulators and given them a list of alleged discrepancies. 2 inspectors in plain clothes and a woman from Consumer Protection arrived within an hour. One of them flashed a folder with the complaint sheet. Their questions were procedural, polite, and clinical. I stayed out of sight while Louise met them at the gate. I planned for this, so the warehouse presented cleanly. All paperwork was chained and easily accessible. We walked them through inventory, through certifications, through the unusual but explainable timestamps where seasonal shipments overlapped. The regulators took photos, made notes, and left with the promise of a report in a week. Then, as they were finishing, I felt the air change. Through the glass of the office, I saw a dark SUV pull up in the lot. Someone I hadn't expected stepped out of the passenger seat and walked straight toward the gate. It was Dad, and behind him, moving with an almost theatrical calm, was Amelia. The woman from Consumer Protection recognized him immediately and offered a smile that was all new warmth. She'd been told this was a family matter that deserved consideration. Suddenly, there were phone calls being exchanged in rapid whispers, and Dad was given a courtesy once reserved for donors and old money patrons. My stomach dropped. This was exactly the theater they loved. Show up, make an accusation, and then loudly appeal to the authorities' goodwill. It was less about law and more about optics. I watched from the office as Dad and Amelia walked the regulators back toward the SUV. Amelia stopped, turned, and caught my eye through the glass. Smirk, small and satisfied. She mounted something I couldn't hear. Then she raised a hand as if to wave, a mockery of civility. I locked the office door and leaned my head against it. Everything I'd done up to this moment, the freezes, the paperwork, the nights of legal ease, felt suddenly fragile under the weight of a public performance. The regulators left with promises and the possibility of a formal inquiry. Dad and Amelia stayed in the lot talking in low tones with Miel hovering nearby, her expression like someone waiting for a curtain to fall. My phone buzz, one new voicemail. The display showed an unknown number. For a second, I thought of the ledger in my bag of the stack of evidence I compiled. Then I remembered the last time I answered an unknown number from this family and came away with a threat veiled as affection. I pressed play. Kyle, the voice was Dad's, close and controlled. They're not going to shut this down today, but they can if they want to. Amelia is prepared to go further. She's consulted with a lawyer. There's a way to make this go away. You know, we can fix this privately. Help us. And all of it stops. The voicemail clicked off. I sat there with my hand on the phone, listening to the echo of his words. Outside, through the glass, Amelia laughed at something Dad said. The sound made something in my chest harden. I stood, put the ledger under my arm, and walked out. The lot smelled faintly of diesel and wet asphalt. Amelia looked up, her expression composed as ever. Dad's face had the look of a man who has practiced righteous indignation for public consumption. "Kyle," Dad said, as if we were still at Sunday dinner and not at the edge of a war. "We can talk." Behind them in the SUV, the engine idled. A woman in a suit I didn't recognize clicked her phone and stood up from the passenger seat. I took the ledger out of my bag and set it on the hood of a nearby van, flipping it open to the page where I'd written the dates of the account freezes. The pages felt heavier with each entry. "You'll lose everything if you don't help," Dad said again. But this time, it sounded different, less a warning and more an ultimatum. Amelia's smile was thin. "You've been very clever, Kyle," she said. "But clever doesn't mean untouchable." I looked at her, then at the woman in the suit, then at the regulators, who had left just minutes earlier, but were now talking into their phones again. I felt the air tighten like the moment before a storm breaks. "Do what you have to," I said quietly, and before anyone could respond, a squad car rolled slowly into the lot. Lights off, but presence unmistakable. 2 officers stepped out, walking toward us with the kind of purposeful steps that make you notice your own heart. Amelia's eyes widened. Dad tensed. The woman in the suit stiffened and put a hand to her ear, the way people do when a plan starts to expand beyond them. One of the officers held up a folder and said, "Mr. Carter, we have a request to inspect the premises further. There's also a complaint here that may require us to secure evidence." The words landed, and I realized I couldn't tell in that moment whether they were on my side or hers. I realized I had spent so long trying to predict where the next blow would fall that I had stopped preparing for the one that would come from the other direction entirely. Amelia took a breath, like someone about to deliver a line she'd practiced. Dad's jaw worked. Muriel made a sound, half gasp, half prayer. I put my hands in my pockets and watched the scene assemble. The ledger open at my feet, the police officers approaching, Amelia poised to say something that would be recorded and replayed. For the first time since I closed that contract, I felt like I was exactly where they wanted me. In the middle of a story somebody else could write. The twist, the reveal, the public spectacle. I thought about walking away. I thought about taking the ledger and going somewhere quiet and legal and boring and safe. But I'd already started this, and there was no retreat that didn't feel like surrender. The younger officer stopped a few feet away and asked, "Are there any managers here I can speak with?" His tone was businesslike, not accusatory. He glanced at Dad and Amelia, then at me. I swallowed. My voice came out steady because the ledger had given me steadiness. "Yes," I said. "I'm Kyle. I run this operation. What do you need?" The older officer unfolded the folder and looked me in the eye. "We received a complaint alleging interference with financial accounts and potential misappropriation," he said. "Until we complete our initial inquiries, we may need to secure certain documents and restrict access to parts of the premises." The words were simple and bureaucratic, and in that moment, they sounded like a verdict. Dad's face closed off. Amelia's hand found his arm and squeezed. I looked at my ledger, at the neat rows of dates and facts, at the list of people who could confirm the timing of every transaction. I thought of Aaron's dry voice on the phone, telling me to let him handle the legal channels. I thought of Luis and the kid who had confessed. Outside, a camera phone lit up. Someone in the lot had started recording. The scene was a slow-motion incision into public life. I closed the ledger, slid it into my bag, and met Amelia's eyes. She looked both triumphant and a little afraid, like someone who had pressed a button and wasn't sure if the machine would obey. "Let them do their job," I said, "and make sure you answer every question truthfully." Her expression flickered. For a breath, she looked uncertain. Then she straightened and, with a diplomacy that had nothing to do with warmth, said, "Of course, transparency is best." The officer nodded. He motioned for me to come to the office with them. My team, Louise, Sarah, Aaron, were on standby. Phones ready, personnel statements prepared. The lot hummed with a dozen small, quiet alarms, cameras, whispers, the continued hum of the SUV engine. As I stepped toward the office, I felt every eye in the lot on me. Family, employees, regulators, law enforcement. The ledger weighed in my bag like a small, ridiculous anchor. I didn't know if the next hours would destroy me or expose them. I didn't know if any of the legal safeguards Aaron had put in place would hold. I only knew that whatever came next, it would be public. It would hurt, and it would irrevocably change the shape of the family that had raised me. I walked past Dad and Amelia, past Miel, past the woman in the suit, and into the office where the officers had set up a temporary workspace. The first thing I did was open my bag and take out the notebook. Then I took a breath and began to talk. I opened the ledger and laid it on the office desk in front of the officers. Each page was organized by date, detailing every account freeze transaction and incident Amelia and the family had tried to manipulate. I also included copies of emails, screenshots of messages, and the recording from the kid who admitted Amelia had tried to bribe him. Aaron had prepared additional documentation, contracts, supplier confirmations, photos of shipments. Everything that proved every step I had taken was legitimate and above board. The officers spent the next hour going through everything meticulously. I explained each entry, gave context where needed, and answered questions as clearly and calmly as possible. They took notes, scanned files, and occasionally exchanged glances that told me they understood the pattern. This wasn't a small family squabble. It was a deliberate campaign of intimidation, manipulation, and attempted sabotage. Meanwhile, outside, Dad and Amelia hovered, their composure slipping under the weight of what was unfolding. Miel paced nervously. From the way they whispered to each other, it was clear they were trying to plot a narrative to somehow turn the tables in their favor. But they were too late. Every move they'd made was documented, time-stamped, and undeniable. Finally, one of the officers looked at me and said, "Mr. Carter, based on what we have here, it appears that any attempts to interfere with your accounts or business dealings are not only unethical, but could be considered criminal in nature. We'll need to file a report for the record and advise your family accordingly." I nodded and felt a strange calm wash over me. The ledger had been my lifeline through this storm, and now it had become the proof that I wasn't the problem. Amelia and the family were. Later that day, I was allowed to speak to the family. Dad, Amelia, and Miel were gathered outside the office. I walked up to them slowly, letting the officers linger nearby, so there would be no theatrics. "Everything you tried, freezing my business, bribing staff, spreading rumors, manipulating suppliers, it's all documented. It won't work. Not with me, not in business, not legally. You underestimated how prepared I am." Amelia's face went pale. "Kyle, we didn't mean—" "Stop," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need apologies. I don't need excuses, and I certainly don't need your approval. You show me exactly who you are. Greedy, entitled, willing to step on anyone who gets in your way, including family." Dad opened his mouth, but the officer nearby shook his head subtly. He knew better than to intervene. "You will not touch my accounts. You will not manipulate my suppliers. You will not come anywhere near my staff. And if you try, it won't be handled as a family matter. It will be legal." I let that settle. Every threat, every attempt to control me, every betrayal, they had nothing left. Amelia's jaw tightened, and Muriel's expression flickered between fear and anger. Dad's hand trembled slightly as he tucked it into his pocket. They were trapped in the mess they'd created for themselves. By the next morning, I had completed a few final administrative moves with Aaron. All my business accounts were fully ringing, fenced under corporate structures they could not touch. Personal accounts were secured, and every supplier had been notified of the situation, so there could be no further interference. Amelia had tried to call, text, and email hundreds of times, but I ignored all attempts. The ledger stayed by my side, a constant reminder of what had happened. The family attempted to spin the story among mutual friends and distant relatives, but no one wanted to side with people who had been caught attempting bribery, intimidation, and fraud. Slowly, their credibility crumbled. Amelia's boutique plan stalled completely. Her investors pulled out once they learned of her attempts to manipulate me, and Dad's authority within the extended family began to diminish. Mila, who had always thrived on gossip and spectacle, found herself isolated as people realized she had been complicit in the schemes. I continued growing my business quietly, now fully insulated from their interference. Every contract I signed, every shipment I sent, was another reminder that I had built my success on my own skill and perseverance. I didn't gloat, and I didn't celebrate publicly. The satisfaction was private, measured in the knowledge that my family's control over me was gone. They tried to reach me one last time, sending a legal notice claiming misappropriation of shared funds and demanding restitution. Aaron reviewed it and laughed quietly. "They've dug themselves a hole," he said. "If they take this further, all of this, every document, every email, every record, they've given us everything we need to protect you and push back." I never responded. I let it sit. Months later, Amelia moved out of the condo her parents had purchased for her and tried to start her boutique again. But without my contacts, suppliers, or investors, it collapsed within weeks. Dad continued to lecture anyone who would listen about Kyle being difficult and family obligations, but no one in the business world cared. Miel tried to salvage her reputation with online posts and public comments, but the narrative of their manipulation had already taken root. I, meanwhile, was thriving. The contracts I had secured before Amelia's interference matured into long-term deals. I expanded my warehouses into 3 states, brought on new staff, and reinvested in my business. My focus was sharp, my decisions deliberate, and my trust carefully given. The family still calls occasionally, but I no longer answer. The ledger is safely tucked away, a reminder of how far I've come and what lengths they went to undermine me. And while they continued to argue among themselves, I am free. Free from manipulation, free from guilt, and free from their entitlement. They wanted me to bend. They wanted me to give in. They wanted to make me the villain. Instead, I outmaneuvered them, secured my life, and let their own greed and entitlement be the downfall they deserved. And for the first time in my life, I smiled without worry. Because the people who had spent decades trying to control me finally had no power left at all. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments.